So in this video, I'm just going to talk about why I feel that the Infinity Engine games and some of the other games that are similar to them, like Diablo and Inquisitor, and other real-time point-and-click combat games, are overrated. In this video, I'm going to focus primarily upon the Infinity Engine games, but some of these points, especially regarding the combat, can of course be applied to games like Diablo and so on, Prince of Quinn, and other real-time point-and-click combat games. Now, real-time point-and-click combat, that's kind of a vague descriptor, I know. That can be applied to any game that you play with a mouse and keyboard. But what I'm talking about specifically are top-down perspective games in which, like 99% of the time in combat, you're simply clicking with the mouse. There's no complex inputs necessary. You don't have to move the mouse in a certain way to do certain things. Like Arx Fatalis, for instance, you have to move the mouse in certain ways to do different spells. You have to swing the sword with the mouse, and that's of course the case in many other games like Daggerfall, Battlespire, Arena, the vast majority of sword fighting games that are attempting to be realistic. But in games like Inquisitor, Diablo, Diablo 2, and so on, you simply hover the mouse over your target and click over and over. And in many of these games you actually just click once and then it auto-attacks until combat is resolved. And yeah, I think that's fundamentally just terrible. It's really boring to me. It doesn't appeal to me whatsoever. So right off the bat, the Infinity Engine games fail to hold my attention just on that basis. But also the Infinity Engine games are absurdly difficult because you don't have really any time to make your decisions. There's no time to move, and because everything is happening simultaneously, the Dungeons and Dragons rule set is just really poorly adapted. Like, this is supposed to be a sequential order turn-based combat game, and because it's real time, initiative is now completely irrelevant. For spellcasters, you don't really have any time to plan. You can't even really use spellcasters in the Infinity Engine games. In many scenarios, I mean, your spellcasters are just going to get overrun almost immediately, so these games really force you into an optimal playstyle. You're really forced into playing with a party comprised primarily of melee characters. Yeah, I just don't care for real-time tactical games. It feels as though you have no time to plan, so I'm just not a fan of them. That's why I don't play them. I've always hated the RTS genre. And that's what the Diablo, Inquisitor, Infinity Engine, Diablo clone games basically are. They're essentially just real-time strategy games on a far, far smaller scale. Instead of, thousands of units against each other or dozens of tanks against each other, it's simply your party of, well, in the Diablo games, of course, one character. Infinity Engine games, somewhere from 5 to 6 characters against, maybe a few dozen enemies maximum. So the stakes are far, far smaller, but fundamentally it's the same game. They're real-time tactical games, and I just don't care for them whatsoever, especially since Dungeons and Dragons was designed to be a turn-based game. It's really a shame that Diablo was as successful as it was, because we could have gotten several turn-based Dungeons and Dragons games in the Infinity Engine, but instead we've gotten, several exclusively real-time games. One of the gigantic problems in terms of difficulty with the Infinity Engine games is that in many encounters you'll just get killed instantly because the games are not turn-based. If the computer reacts quicker than you do, and it almost always will, you could just get killed instantly by certain enemies like beholders. Whereas if it were a turn-based game, you may succeed on an initiative roll and you might be able to go first. It's not even a possibility in the Infinity Engine games. And as I said, spellcasters, you really have no way to do anything. I mean, you're going to get shot and killed by archers almost immediately, or enemy melee characters are going to be upon you in 1 or 2 seconds, so unless you can move your mouse around that quickly and click on the spells you want, you're just not going to get anything accomplished. So that's why I think adapting Dungeons and Dragons to real time was terrible. Especially the way that they did it. I mean, they should have had more hotkeys for spells, for one thing. And they should have made the combat a bit slower than it was. It could still be real time, but it definitely needed to be a bit slower. That way you actually have time to react to things and click on things, move the mouse around the screen. And as it is, the game is just so fast-paced. I mean, if you're fighting archers and your party is comprised primarily of spellcasters, you're just going to die every time. So that's why I say the Infinity Engine games, they really force you into primarily a melee or, ranged physical combat party instead of a spellcaster party. These games, they really get praised just so heavily, it blows my mind. They're really poorly designed, in my opinion. But anyway, I just had to throw that out there. This just really irritates me about these games. They're so highly regarded, and yet they're so poorly designed, in my opinion, anyway. And I just had to throw that out there. It really irritates me seeing all the praise these games get. Baldur's Gate 3 was an improvement in that it is actually turn-based, but they're using the 5th edition rule set, so it's still a terrible game, really. Especially with all the, well, I dare not say it because we're on YouTube, but due to all the propaganda that's in the game regarding various topics. It amazes me that Baldur's Gate 3 is such a highly rated game. But anyway, gaming is dead in general. That's why on this channel I play almost exclusively old games. I don't see gaming turning around. We're just going to get worse and worse games in terms of, well, every respect, actually. I mean, other than, texture detail, they're going to get worse. Optimization, color palette, color contrast, the soundtrack, the writing, the gameplay, the user interface design, and so on. I would way rather play Pool of Radiance Ruins of Myth Drannor than any Infinity Engine game, unironically. And I've played Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, all the way through, including the expansion packs. And I enjoyed Baldur's Gate somewhat, but Baldur's Gate 2 was really terrible. I just played it because, it's such a famous game. And the story was kind of interesting. That kept me going a little bit, but I was not enjoying myself playing Baldur's Gate 2 for the most part. Some of the boss fights that were challenging, they were fun to figure out what I need to do to get through them, but as I said, because the game is in real time, it's also extremely frustrating if you're using primarily spellcasters in your party. So the game was kind of nightmarish sometimes. I can't recommend Baldur's Gate or Baldur's Gate 2 due to the real-time combat. But anyway, as I was saying, I would way rather play older games than these newer games. I would way rather play even an old real-time strategy game than a new turn-based game.